2020 was something that a lot of people are looking towards, but did not live up to the potential. When WHO declared COVID-19 as a pandemic, right? As a person, we have to learn something new. Most of us are wearing masks at the moment, and we have to sanitize ourselves. There's social distancing, there's no dine-in. So what we did was we just removed those social interaction from ourselves, right? So that's a big change for a social creature as a human being. But as a business, it's not as easy, it's even harder, right? So it's affected our bottom line, right? So now every shop have to sanitize every now and then. We have to rent a bigger space because of social distancing, and it's affecting our top line because of the economic trials. So let's look at the three biggest sectors that are affected by COVID-19. I don't think I have to tell this to everyone, but these are the main areas, right? We're looking at tourism, we are looking at retail, we're looking at entertainment. Before joining MDEC, I worked as the head of transformation in AirAsia. Boy, was it depressing, right? So when it started in March 2022, we can see like a whole fleet of red aircraft on the ground, not doing anything, right? So and then as the months go by, people got laid off, right? You get into unpaid leave, and when you become redundant, you get laid off, right? With that, in 2020, the aviation industry declared a 13 billion loss, right? So that's a huge one, and almost 13,000 of the people got laid off. And hotels industry, because of the reliance towards aviation industry, it became the same, right? They declared 11.3 billion loss in 2020. And I think it's around, if you're looking around right now, only around 60% of the hotels that are operating in 2019 is currently operating now. Lots of big names are declared permanent closure. The next one is retail, right? My wife has a small cafe that she opened up in 2019, and as the pandemic hit, she suffered a lot of losses because of it, right? She had to incur a lot of costs, and the sales are really not that good, right? As you can see there, we are experiencing negative 16.3% growth. We have never seen that in the last 100 years, right? And 30% of the malls closed, and 300,000, that's a lot of Malaysian that's left unemployed because of the affected sectors, right? Last but not least, entertainment. Obviously, no cinemas are allowed to open, and it got reduced from 900 million to 138 million, right? And sadly enough, MBO has recently declared permanent closure, right? So that is the one, that is the biggest hit sectors that we're looking at, just because a person decide to eat a bat somewhere across the world, right? But it's not all doom and gloom, right? So a lot of businesses manage to pivot. And if you look at this, there are three main themes when they pivoted, right? They either go online. As you can see right now, a lot of SMEs went through Lazada, and they went through Shopee. We can see the adoption rate of e-commerce hiked up for almost 230% year to year. That's just amazing, right? And on top of that, a lot of websites. So website year on year are increasing by 110%. That's just amazing. And last but not least is to go cashless, right? So these are the three main themes, that the three main strategy that the SMEs are doing in order for them to pivot. I just would like to call out that I mentioned SMEs, right? And the reason for that is because it's a lot easier for SMEs to pivot. Why is that? Right? It's because it requires, in most SMEs, it requires only 2 people to decide to pivot, right? So I can just speak to my wife and say that, you know what, we need to start selling in Shopee. Let's do that. Next day, we sell it on Shopee already, right? But big organization requires different processes, right? Decision making, risk assessment, and assurances, projections, all of these are considered as it's unnecessary bureaucratic processes, right? Um, so this is the crazy thing that we are talking about today. So bureaucracy, right? It's such a there's such a negative connotation around bureaucracy, right? If I mention bureaucracy right now, I think it sent down like a shields of shivers to everyone, right? Because everyone just hate bureaucracy. But has anyone ever think about what does bureaucracy really mean, right? Let's just look into that. So this is how you define bureaucracy. An institution that is highly organized, formalized, and also impersonal. It is the most proficient form of organization, right? It's defined by Max Weber in 1920s. That is just crazy, right? Look at how positive the definition of bureaucracy is, right? Who doesn't want an organized, a formalized, and impersonal organization? I think every one of you today would want that type of organization. But what happened? What happened to bureaucracy that it becomes so negative nowadays, right? So if you can see, these are some of the advantages, right, and how we define bureaucracy. Again, it's a lot positive than the brand of bureaucracy at the moment. You can see that bureaucracy is a hierarchical organization with a specific function. Everyone knows the rules. Everyone knows their roles and responsibility. And we don't hire everyone, right? We hire for skills. And that made it easier for us to monitor performance as well as put accountability and governance, right? So if it's really that bad, right? If bureaucracy is really that good, then why is it viewed negatively nowadays, right? So it's weird for me. So I did a little digging when I got into MDEC. I did a little digging of why has it become so bad, right? So this is it, right? Max Weber defined bureaucracy in 1920s. We are 100 years on to 2021 at the moment. What has happened, the average people in an organization in 1920 is around 50, right? That's an average. The average personnel or employee in an organization today is around 3,000, right? So what happened when you add more people? You had more layers. And what happened when you add more layers? The processes grew, right? So I've seen an organization where you have assistant, you have executive, senior executive, assistant manager, manager, senior vice president, so on, right? So I've seen an organization where there are 13 layers from the CEO to the lowest person in the company, right? So that, when the processes grew, red tapes happen, right? This is what we call it nowadays, right? So when the processes slow down, there are a lot of red tapes. And because of that, it's not only getting things done, but cascading information as well, right? Information going up is going to be extremely slow, and information going down also is going to be very slow. And it's not only about the speed, it's about the context, right? There's a lot of there's a lot of context that got lost in translation, and that's when organization fall apart. And on top of that, the industry back then in 1920s are extremely predictable, right? So there are a few things. We have military, we have probably manufacturing, and then there are mom and pop shops, right? But nowadays, the industries are unpredictable, right? I think most of you have heard this, where there's a saying saying that the only constant thing in life is change, right? So how do we actually implement that amazing quote and put into the bureaucracy today, right? And of course, because of that, we cannot manage to adapt to change in all the unexpected unexpected changes in the industry, right? So this is the real monster that we want to address, right? So simplifying bureaucratic process. So if you talk to a lot of transformation heads or transformation consultants, so people have different opinions on how we should address this, right? And for me, I have one opinion that I think could be working well for big organizations, right? And that is that the simplifying bureaucratic process needs to start from the board of directors, right? And hence why I'm so excited to speak with everyone today, right? Because I think when we talk about, a lot of people thought that simplifying bureaucratic processes can start with the CEO level. I disagree with that, right? Because I think It's the role of the board of directors to ensure simplification of bureaucratic process, right? If you look at the role of the board of directors, very simple definition there is to direct and guide the organization in the right direction, right? So there are two things under fiduciary that we are looking at is performance and compliance, right? So right now we are just talking about performance sake, right? So if you look at this, and it's fairly simple, right? So the board of directors need to address three main issues in order for us to simplify bureaucratic process. Number one is to do reorg, right? So, so I know that a lot of people hate the word reorgs, right? And I think it has affected most people. Every time when there's a reorg, people will be like, oh, not again, right? And that is because, similar to bureaucracy, reorg has a negative brand to it, right? Because what happened, not typically why people do reorg is to cut down costs, right? The only thing that we do reorg is just to cut down costs. So hence why people hate reorganization. But let's take a different perspective to it. Instead of doing it because of to cut costs, let's do it to reorganize ourselves, right? And the intention is to get as minimal layers as possible, right? Having less people managers and more individual contributors, right? I'm not saying that people managers are bad, because I'm a people manager as well, but 30 or 40% of my job is to do individual contributor work, right? Because at the end of the day, the real value are being created at individual contributor level, right? So that's the first one. So reorg to make sure that we reduce as much layer as possible and get as much individual contributor in the team, right? Number two, what people tend to forget is that as they do reorganization, they forgot to reconnect the processes, right? So this is the biggest mistake that I've seen, where people do reorganization and just put that new org into the same processes, right? It's not going to happen. So we need to reconnect these processes, right? Make sure that it makes sense to apply these processes onto the new organization, right? So, and last but not least, is I think the board of directors should refrain by in this approach or thought process that considered technology as a cost center, right? It should be, I understand that it's under capex and so on and so forth, but if you see argument in boards when it comes to technology, it has always been about ROI. It has always been about what is the return if we invest in this technology, right? So instead of doing that, we have to go beyond ROI, right? It's already a necessity for us to have technology. It's no longer about ROI, right? So I think that the board of directors should refocus the organization. Obviously, P&L is number one, but number two or number three should be focusing about how we're going to take the organization from where we are today into a tech company, right? Tech in a sense, operationally, not trying to sell technology or so on and so forth, right? So, and that brings us to the last point that I want to touch, right? It's something so simple, but it kind of like scare a lot of people, right? Disruptive technology. And if you look at the definition, it's fairly simple. It's a technology that affects the normal operation of a market or an industry. But this approach in itself is an idiosyncrasy, right? So as the board member, as the management, what we want to do is to organize ourselves, right? We need to make sure that the organization are simple and put in place. But this definition asks us to disrupt ourselves, right? So what's going on here, right? What do you really want? So what I'm trying to say is that, so if you look at this, right, I think everyone have used this, at least one of them, right? Netflix, Grab, and Spotify, right? So what these three companies has done really well is to always question themselves, right? Is this the best way for us to deliver to the customers, right? The board of directors has always been sitting down and think with the management and say whether is this the best way to do it, right? I think you have experienced how Netflix suggests new movies to you that you don't know that you like, right? It has bad reviews, but suddenly when you play it, yeah, it's a decent movie, right? And Grab and Spotify use big data as well as machine learning to suggest what's the best song for you, right? I don't even know that I like Adele Easy on Me, but when Spotify suggests it to me and I click play, huh, it's not that bad. So how can they know what I like, right? So that's something that Netflix, Grab, and Spotify has been doing really well, right? They know that the objective of the company is to make people listen to us more, and let's just question ourselves, how can we do that better, right? So I know that we are not running Netflix, Grab, and Spotify, but let's look at the other side of the disruptive technology, right? Let's look at ERP, right? Typically, a lot of people will use Oracle, will use SAP, right? Because why? Because it's well established, it's across borders and whatnot. But have you ever considered if you ever consider looking at startups when it comes to ERP? There are startups that allows you to use machine learning or artificial intelligence to manage your resources better, right? So this is something that I would want to leave you with, right? Instead of going with the norm, it's no longer there. Oracle and SAP, I'm not going against it, I'm not saying that they are bad, but Oracle and SAP are struggling to remain relevant nowadays, right? Because a lot of ERPs are being, a lot of new ERP, disruptive ERPs are coming into the market, right? So this is something that I want you guys to consider, right? Instead of going with the norm, find a technology, a tool that can allow us to always question ourselves, right? So with that, I just want to leave you with this. Before that, so I think I just spoke to this earlier. The reason why we should embrace this is because it unlocks opportunity, right? When you have an agile ERP, then it's easier for you to adapt to the changes in the industry. So I just want to leave you with this final quote. It's by Charles Darwin. I'll get into trouble just by quoting Charles Darwin. So it is not the strongest or the most intelligent who will survive, but those who can best manage change, right? So we have seen a lot of amazing forward-looking company hired the best, the MIT, the Harvards of the world, fail. Because why? Because they focus on being smart, not focus on being adaptable, right? So I think this is where the board of directors, when we look at, and the conference today is about board transformational and future governance, should consider, right? Instead of trying to be the best in your niche, try to be the best in adapting changes, right? Because as we move on to the next century, in my opinion, it's going to be interchangeable, right? In order for you to be the best in your niche, you have to be the best in adapting to your market. Thank you very much. My name is Muhammad Afdal Muhammad Nayan. Assalamualaikum.